What's up, guys? Just give me one sec. Make sure the sound is good. We'll start it up in about a minute. Give me a quick sound check. Cool. All right. So I meant to post a video last night, but as you guys saw, I'm sure, our boy cut his head. So had to have a vet come down, put some stitches in, and then this morning had to have staples put in on top of those. So needs a new bumper pad for the trailer, and I guess my wife also ordered him this cap that someone linked. A lot of love for the for our horses on Twitter. So every time I post something about the horses, I get a million direct DMs with suggestions and all that. So needless to say, a little bit thrown off in terms of scheduling, but it's all good. So going to take a look at BTC, ETH, Solana, sort of market leaders right now. I'll give a little bit of an opinion and hopefully wrap it up pretty quickly. So another thing, you guys know I'd love to just go through all of the things that are going on in my day. I shared maybe a month ago, a picture of a dog. We're adopting a puppy, a Rhodesian Ridgeback, naming her Nymeria, very excited, getting ready for the new puppy. And that turned out to fall through. Weird situation. The woman originally said that she had a female dog that was pregnant, and it would either be that we would get from the first litter or the second, and we want a female. So if a female came through the first litter, good to go. She said that any day now. So we're thinking clearly our puppy's being born. And I posted something along the lines of our puppy's being born, or our puppy's born. There's weird communication back and forth between this person. And then I reached out because I'm like, hey, I haven't heard from you. I know obviously the puppy needs a little bit of time. I think it's maybe 8 weeks or 4 weeks before they could be adopted and, taken away from their mom. Not really sure exactly about that. I think it's 8. So 2 months along those lines. So hadn't heard anything, no progress report, no pictures. So I reached back out to her, and she's like, oh yeah, so we have a female that's in heat, and she's been around a male, so we're hoping. And I'm thinking, what? Is this woman a drinker or something? Did she forget that she had me under the impression that there was one being born, right? So we found a new Rhodesian, and I have to go at 5 o'clock in the morning. I have to take a 4-hour trip to go to upstate New York to pick up our new puppy. And her name is Freya. And she is a 2-month-old Rhodesian, and she's beautiful. So a lot of stuff going on. I feel like I haven't had a single day to really just relax since we've moved into a new house. All right. So just my opinion on the market overall right now. I think that we still have some legs left in the majors, especially. I would say, could be completely wrong, right? But I think that there is some dislocation that is kind of starting to become fairly obvious, right? I think to anybody, we have ETH moving up. Right, dragging BTC up with it. We get a significant BTC move, but it's through a level that 50K level. I don't have to put it on. I don't have to put it precise. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. This 50K low of this prior range back here. Very significant level. You want to see a ton of participation come into the market. This would be essentially the first daily close through it if we maintain this for the next 5 hours. And then, how we play this. acceptance into a previous range, very significant level retaken, yada yada yada. We're looking at at least from low to mid back up to the high, and I think that we have some friction ahead. If we're going to continue up, probably around the 53 pocket. There's a low volume node right around there, and it kind of coincides with this gap back here. And then 57, 58 within range. So we have this move up, right? And I think we're starting to see a bit more of an obvious dislocation in not only alts, but between the futures and the spot market. So now I think it's fairly obvious that BTC has been trading on Bybit, for example, at a pretty consistent premium to spot markets. That FTX perps have been trading at a pretty consistent premium. Whereas about a week ago, I was starting to say, okay, might be worth paying attention here because, it's poking up once in a while. Whereas now it's a lot more consistent. It's not consistent, rather it's persistent. All right. So that's something worth considering, right? We have market that it's not really a rising tide moment. It feels very much like sort of musical chairs. We have money being deployed in very specific names, consistently, a little bit of sharing between some of the other alts, some of the majors moving up here and there, but again, no sort of major rising tide moment, which you want to see for if, hypothetically, this is the next major leg of the cycle. Instead, very simply what it feels like is, and make sure you guys still with me, stream connection. Instead, what it feels like is, it's the same money kind of being recycled in, again, game of musical chairs. So, I do think that this is not necessarily a good sign, right? You want to see new money you want to see new capital come into the system. And yeah, not to be overly negative, but that is what I'm seeing right now. And we're at higher time frame resistance. We have these dislocations. There's a couple other details worth focusing on as well. Funding rates have been, become again more persistently positive. And then one more detail to focus on is also that we have the quarterlies that will be expiring this month. So there have been, let me just go to the futures premiums. There's been some decent premiums further out in the curve, right? So if we look at FTX, for example, annualized premium March 22, December, September, fairly elevated. Nothing crazy, but enough for these sort of basis traders to want to step in and sort of squash that. So selling into that. So I think that we're going to see that September probably does take on sort of the same behavior that it's been known to taking on. We've been moving up now for, going back to the end of July, right? So July, August into September, we're like 4 weeks now of just up only market. Okay. All right. So that being said, just to always know where you are and sort of what the larger flows are that you're dealing with. Looking at BTC, all right, we have solid moves the entire way up. Yesterday, one of the first days where we actually had a fair amount of soak at the highs earlier on, right? So we had soak at the highs. So the day developing mostly like this. So most of the activity isolated at the highs before breaking down lower, all right, forming a little bit of a range. And then the earliest hours of today, taking out yesterday's low, trading back within the value area of that structure and offering a fairly clean Dalton setup. So acceptance within, right, first move back to the midpoint of the range, successful retest, and then you get the entire move through value. And now again, rather than just taking the highs and continuing down, we've taken the lows, take yesterday's low, take yesterday's high, and sort of flirting around at what should act as should logically be support at this point. Fast moving trend, right? What we'll normally see is that you're not going to immediately come back to this level on a breakout, right? So instead, we've had an immediate expansion upward, right? So significant candle movement upward through yesterday's highs. All the signs that we want to look for to see, potentially signs of acceptance. We have high volume, right? Initially, we don't have a tremendous amount of absorption, price moving fairly quickly, multiples of what the ATR would normally be expected for 30-minute candle. So again, all the things that you want to look for. And then we have a sell-off back down to yesterday's high, very quickly bought up. Leading up to the one more troubling detail is that, what we have is kind of a grind back down to a level that we sprung off of previously. And it's just kind of the same thing that I go over where I say, if we have, market snaps back down to a level and it leaves sort of a single print, or if it leaves, a very significant wick on the low time frames, right? So not much time spent at all. Ideally, you leave and continue from that area, right? It's showing a very significant response by a buyer down here, shorts covering whatever it is. Coming back down to that level to test out that demand is just not necessarily the greatest sign, but needless to say, support is still support until it's support no more. So we're still at yesterday's high, holding it. It's just not necessarily the best sign that you would, the best response you would want, the best kind of response that you would be looking for, right? That sounded fucking stupid. It's not the best response, right? So looks like the market is losing a little bit of speed, right? So signs of froth, signs of funding being a little bit elevated, dislocation, and responses in sort of the one asset that we're all looking to now to put in its larger move, and it's sort of puttering on the gas pedal. If this offers a acceptance back within yesterday's range, I probably would play the same type of setup that I would had it accepted within yesterday's value. So just to go over clearly what that means, if again, I talk about this, if we have some type of range develop and we do have a fake out, right? So a false break, we talk about what happens when you have this type of scenario, right? When you snap out longs, when you stop them out and you take out any kind of future selling pressure, when you trigger, right? When you trigger breakout shorts, when you break back up through that structure, there should be less pressure from the long side, more pressure from the short side to help this carry through. If you take both sides and we start floating back to one of those fake outs, so if we're just imagining that this range is a range in isolation, nothing ahead, nothing below, right? And we have a clean range formed, or mostly a clean range after this move off of the open. Take out the low, take out the high. If we're back within this structure, I anticipate continuation, right? To the upside if we return back to the highs, to the downside if we return back to the lows. But if we fall back within yesterday's range period, I would expect that we at least retest the lows of that range. So let me clarify that because I said sort of the same thing, but what I mean to say is if we at some point after taking the low, taking the high, return to the low or to the high, I expect continuation from there. But if now we've taken the low of yesterday's structure, taken the highs and fall back within yesterday's range, I would expect us to sort of fall into the same pattern of behavior that we were yesterday, that we had yesterday, which is range-like sort of rotational behavior. So, for me, that would mean if we're to lose what is now very clearly the level of support that's being retested, and again, you shouldn't have this kind of opportunity to buy support. Not to say that is sort of the, I kind of talk about these little details and nuance, and it might sound like that is then therefore like the concrete evidence that you need to make the case for, all right, now it's testing support too long. It's this is bad. It's going to break down. It can still break up, right? It's just we're trying to on balance of probabilities make decisions rather on balance of probabilities, and often this does not result favorably when you've kind of hung around the level. So if we fall back within yesterday's high, which is clearly where this little battle is taking place, then I would expect that we're probably going to come back down to to retest 50,000, 50,000 retest, you could argue that that would be the significant level to retest now after having this significant move through, right? So after this expansion, maybe it's the 50K level where the significant retest should take place rather than yesterday's high, because that is, again, a key psychological level. But in terms of lower time frame trading, break back within yesterday's high, looking to test 50K. If we're unable to hold 50K, that's where today's VWAP is right now. I would expect that we would retest the value area low of yesterday's structure, which is what price is that? Excuse me. That's 49,500. So pretty much fall back within the range, fall back into ranging behavior. All this though taking place relatively close to a very significant line in the sand, right? We're hanging around the area too much for my liking to also see that along with the signs of dislocation and a little bit of frothiness in the futures market. If we end up breaking up from here, so if, let's say we've had this significant move to the upside, we do hold yesterday's high, and then now we're trading back above where, if we put on the volume point of control, trade back above today's POC, then we can make a case, I would say, immediately for continuation, right? Retested the level, didn't pull back to that 50K zone. Looking at how today's profile is developing, right? Same as yesterday. You want to see that you're continuing to maintain the point of control, right? That's just where most of the activity has come into the market. So if we're back above the point of control, which right now happens to be right around the value area high, and we are sort of into the later portion of the day, most of the days develop, you imagine the value area high is there's probably not much development left. It's not going to really shift at this point. We've had a significant trending day. It's fairly elongated. Then I would say the next significant area we should look to, and this is a wide shoreline, right? It's not like this is a really precise level, is a gap that occurred on the way down back in May. So it honestly is anywhere between, this 51,500 and I would say 53 zone, right? If we zoom out, right, we just put on the visible range. So you have this low volume node right around 53, excuse me. And then that 5150 level, those are just the highs pre-breakdown, right? So if we look right here, zoom out. So you have those highs, all right? And you have sort of this lower volume pocket, right? It's not like it completely drops off. It's not like it wasn't traded frequently before, but just leading to the breakdown, this was the last sort of gap before the retest of those range lows. So, if you're looking at the high time frame structure and sort of looking at it the same way we might look at the profile on a lower time frame, right, on a session basis, that's kind of an area where you would expect things to get a little bit thinner. And also where I would say, looking at the energy levels of the market right now, I think we still could see a good amount of FOMO come in. FOMO into sort of this air pocket, right, which is the closest air pocket we have on the chart on the higher time frame. I would expect that we're probably going to put in a high up there, right, for some type of larger corrective pullback. And I don't mean larger like we have to come back to 36K or anything. I just mean what we're starting to see is the thin wiki behavior now. Like we had a few significant pushbacks by sellers. First decent amount of liquidations yesterday, but really not that much compared to what is actually probably accumulated in the last week. So in the last week, we've seen a fair amount of leverage likely come into the system. And that might sound odd because it sounds like I'm making a very declarative statement, but sort of leaving it up in the air as if we're uncertain about it. I think actually we can be pretty certain considering the consistency now, or the persistence, as I said, in funding, that we do have leverage in the system. So I'm going to kind of hang my hat on that one. I think that 53 is probably the max for this larger move. And there's no FUD in that. It's been a long move, right? It's easy to forget that this goes all the way back now into July, and we're the first week of September. So that's BTC. ETH, I think. So ETH obviously very strong, right? If we look at the ETH BTC chart, we're tapping at all-time highs. Excuse me, not all-time highs. We're tapping at this cycle's high, all-time high going back all the way till 2017. So very significant. Every time ETH starts moving, the flipping narrative comes up. Maybe there is a case to be made for that gap being substantially closed between BTC and ETH. I do think that given we have EIP, I always forget the numbers, 590 or whatever. I think that given the fact that, one, that's sort of an event that a lot of people are long into, but two, it's not necessarily that simple because it does have a material impact on the overall supply. So you reduce the supply of an asset, you're going to have a drastic impact on the way that it moves. And if you have the same amount of demand and the supply is reducing, you will see a change in sort of the level of appreciation or the rate of appreciation. So I do think that ETH is in a different time than it's ever been in because of this new dynamic, right? That being said, if we look at ETH USD, right, we're at a level where, so we're again similar to BTC, but in this case we are actually at the all-time highs pretty much. BTC has some space to go. So if we're looking at ETH, it's got we're 10% roughly. BTC, you're looking at around 30%, right? So ETH right there. Okay. The thing about right there is it's hard to justify. Just bear with me. It's a little thought experiment, but it makes sense to me. It's hard to justify really holding this up here. Holding it. So you just came back and you forgot about your ETH longs. You look at the chart right now. How do you feel? I personally would look at this and I'm thinking, and that's why I unloaded some positions yesterday. Initially, they were futures positions, but I started de-risking a little bit of spot. So I actually had some decent future swings in the last week. Minimal, nothing insane, but I felt better about myself because I was having kind of a choppy trading period the last 2 months, I want to say. And I know why. It's because in part-time trading, you can't trade the way that I try to trade and kind of go in and out of your office and be doing one thing and then your wife has me doing another. You get the idea, right? You moved and it's difficult to sort of focus. So that was, I guess, confidence inspiring to have some good trades, but I don't want to try to continue to squeeze too much out of this when we are at this level, because the way I look at it is, yes, we're so close to a level that, again, it comes down to it's a very attractive level to sell, right? From a risk to reward standpoint, very attractive. And even if you don't want to wrap your head around that, let's say that you're flat, right? It's also a level that you're so close that the long is, how much are you missing out on? That's the idea, right? Would you be willing to miss out on a 9% move for, the certainty of what is likely a much larger move if we reclaim the all-time high? If you reclaim the all-time high with ETH, you have footing up there. The first, you have some alts obviously breaking their all-time highs, but I think ETH sends a significant signal across the market. Then it becomes a lot more, to me at least, this is how I feel, because I've seen this many times before, where it's almost like, all right, I see ETH doing the thing that I feel like BTC is going to do in a week. I could take this on the confidence, with confidence that BTC is going to follow, or what, I could wait for a little bit more evidence, but 9 times out of 10 when I see ETH leading, and it has structural similarities between other alt pairs that have led, right, and pulled other alts up with it, and ETH is leading and it's making headway through very significant levels. I mean, it'd be very difficult for me to wrap my head around ETH breaking the all-time high, finding footing up there, and not immediately not immediately like in the matter of minutes, but in a matter of weeks leading to BTC sort of following. So you're so close to a level where it's worth it to sell and wait. Put it that way. That is just at least how I'm thinking. If we look at ETH as far as the higher time frames, if we look at ETH on the lower time frames right now, so yesterday there's a reason why I said, I shared this image yesterday minus all of this, right? So as it developed, we ended up recovering that entire range and putting in a very significant move to the upside afterward. But one thing that I noticed with ETH, with BTC, is that after, even in sustained trends, right, that are sort of towards the tail end of their moves, it's rare that you look at it and it has a single day, post-trend day, that rolls over. So what I mean by that is you have a double distribution trend day right here for ETH, significant move up, right? Big gap down here, big area of single prints, okay? Value area high, the structure being right there, followed by a very balanced day. So very symmetrical, very nice distribution, perfect range-bound behavior. Very rarely do you have the market, trend up strong like this, have one balanced day, and then just roll from there. What you'll see with ETH and BTC, BTC, I've mentioned this many times, you're getting probably at least 2 to 3 days of balanced behavior before continuation. And at least when you have 2 to 3 balanced days, you don't have to just lean on the idea that it's only going to be for continuation. What you can be more confident about is after 2 to 3 balanced days, when you have commitment outside of that sort of area that's defining the range, you have more certainty in the direction of that move probably continuing, right? Or if it resolves to the upside or to the downside. So the idea was, looking at ETH, why the long presented itself is almost just on the back of personal observation in how TPOs, how these patterns sort of transpire, right? Normally you'll have, again, 2 to 3 balanced days with BTC, similar with ETH, right? So the first move down to the low, right, outside of value, sitting above an area where you would expect a strong trending move to bounce off of anyway, right? So if we look at, the trend over time, where is a good area to get involved? Well, one of the better areas to get involved is back at the single prints, right? So if you have, move up, bang, bang, these gaps between these single prints are, if you were calling them single prints because you trade TPO, or if you're looking at a trend, you're talking about buying the lows, right? Buy the dips. That's where the dips usually come into, right? They usually come back to the areas where there are those pockets of liquidity, where there are stops, right? Where there's one-way trade dominant. And, the idea was, okay, so we have those single prints down here. We have just one balanced day. Odds are that any correction below yesterday's lows or below yesterday's value area probably going to lead to a move that at least takes us back to the top side of the range. So not a whole lot of order flow in that trade at all. Rather just kind of leaning on what has been a pattern of events that has occurred between both assets. Sure, you could have one day that it just rolls over and that's sort of the statistical anomaly, but it very infrequently happens that way. You normally have 2 balanced days, 3 balanced days before continuation or reversal. And if you have, and a lot of the times what you will have is if you have those 2 balanced days or 3 balanced days, you'll have a fake out towards one of the sides that immediately gets sent back within the range. And that's when okay, we talked about fake out, why it moves so hard in the opposite direction. Well, it's because you've sort of cleared the runway for the market to race in this case towards the highs. Just make sure the stream is still good. So the only trouble with this right now is, again, very strong day. It looks like the moves are, with BTC and ETH, are becoming a little bit more driven by shorts being stopped out. So, I mean, you had spot buying the entire time for both. Now we're having leverage in both directions. So you're probably not going to reverse until you stopped out those shorts, right? But the structure has become a little bit more flimsy and reminiscent of sort of short squeeze behavior towards the highs anyway. So you have, after this balanced day, expansion upward, you have a double distribution day. So not necessarily the strongest trending structure. It's the most, I guess, one-sided because it's not something that sort of built bases along the way. Instead, you just had a very significant move to the upside. If we look at the point of control right now, what we need to do is continue to maintain this. So it's kind of chopping around the center of this range. If at any point we see that ETH continues to move upward, above this, again, very significant level, so 4K, if we see progress above 4K, but we continue to fall back within this level, and we see this point of control shift, right, and most of the volume, you could look at the footprint, you look for divergences in CVD. If we see that there's a fair amount of volume that continues to get trapped at these highs, well, at that point, again, we have these other signs that BTC's trading a little bit differently right now. Alt market is trading a little bit differently. I think it pays to always consider, one, what's taking place in the lower time frames, and two, sort of frame that in where we are in the high time frame. So again, for the lower time frame traders, it would be worth selling at some point when this chart develops a certain way, right? So we're looking at a lower time frame chart. We're a lower time frame trader right now. If we see that most of the volume is getting trapped at this high, price starts to lose that. We have this sort of gap back below. We know that if we gain acceptance within that gap, we're probably covering it fairly quickly. Not much development below us. We had one balanced day that led to this double distribution. All right, so you have a good amount of evidence to build a case around a lower time frame short position. All right, so that's the lower time frame chart, but think about your higher time frame traders too right now that are sitting and looking at this develop as well, and they're sort of scaling this, they're applying the same reasoning to their scales and having a little bit more gunpowder likely behind their decision. So very significant level. I think it really pays to be hyper vigilant about how you size positions around here, how much leverage you use, and so forth. Just because, again, we're at a very key point within market structure. I tend to err on the side of caution. Crypto Twitter is very up only. It's long until you're really wrong sort of thing. I know that you could probably hear in my tone that I frequently will get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm cautious. Maybe more than other people, but it's rare that a market is so one-sided. So coming from trading the ES, you could say the S&P is one-sided, pretty much one-directional. But coming from trading crude oil, you just have a little bit of more respect for the fact that the market can move in both directions very swiftly. So when I'm saying be cautious, it's not like I'm bearish on BTC or bearish on ETH. I feel like if you say that, you're like talking against the kingdom. You're saying something against the king at that point. But there are evidence, signs of evidence at this point that are worth, I guess, paying attention to a little bit more strictly. Sol has been stampeding its way upward. Now we are sort of doing the same thing that BTC did, right? This was yesterday for BTC. You have this trending move upward, 2 strong days up. So trend. And now it looks like, for the first time, price losing a little bit of steam, but, it doesn't look like maybe price is losing steam. Buyers are still stepping in, but they're having less of an effect on price. You see there right now we're beginning to favor the lower portion of this value area while the volume is mostly at the highs, right? So sitting above us right now. Sol's been on an absolute stampede. I think that Sol has not had its sort of mother of all squeezes yet. It's very likely that this kind of behavior results in a candle that is probably multiples the previous, that is sort of the top candle, right? So after this kind of consistent grind upward, you rarely will finish with a little whimper like this. You'll probably finish, at least for the, for a decent amount of time, with a big expansion, multiples of what we normally have seen in terms of our daily range. And that's, a good sign that price is probably, that the trend has probably exhausted itself. That sort of final blowout. But the thing about Sol is, I haven't really seen anybody talking about shorting it. It's the first time I haven't seen like crypto Twitter get passionately opposed to something that's moving up because they want to be the one to short. I think people are just actually in agreement rather that it's the future, right? So it's going to be not necessarily the one that takes the crown, but that it's going to be here for a long time and that it's hasn't seen its top yet. Taking a look at funding rates right now. So things are on and off, but if anything, we've seen that they've just been leaning slightly more positive than, again, this entire move up. So for the last, now it's been 2 weeks since we started to notice the more consistent, or not consistent, but 2 weeks since we started to notice a little bit of a premium pop up here and there. And this is what we're talking about, right? We started to notice it we're in the same sort of spot, right? It's not like we're saying, oh, we noticed it and we were down at 42. No, this is the last couple of weeks we've been forming more of an inside type of structure that normally would form when price is a little bit overextended and exhausted. So now we've gone from 2 weeks ago mentioning the first premium. I said, I think, I forgot where exactly this was. It's on Twitter, though, where we had the first time that I noticed Bybit trading at a $100 premium, and that it'd been a while since we saw that. And now, sort of as we've just moved mostly sideways, it's now consistent. So, sign of positioning, right? And this would be okay if we were in price discovery above the all-time high. But, as I said, this is at a key level where we would expect sellers to step in. So again, this is something that is worth being cautious about rather than saying, oh, this is normal when the market is going into another bullish cycle or bullish period. We're not there yet. We're still within market structure for BTC. And I think until BTC breaks the all-time high, I will still be skeptical. Because again, one thing that is very important to pay attention to, and this is something that's important in equities too, it's, they talk about market breadth. So the ratio between stocks that are moving upward versus stocks that are moving downward in the S&P. You could talk about the advanced decline. So, the highs, the temporary tops, the turning points in the market, they are when there's obviously less capital that's able to continuously come in. And instead of a bunch of capital coming in and lifting everything up, capital cycles between things, right? So there's more rotation internally than there is actual outside injection. And at some point, there are no deals left, right? There are no more good opportunities to take advantage of. So we do have a situation like that right now where, this is one thing that I'll just mention, and I will mention a name or names because I think it is useful, and I think it's obvious, right? No one is ignorant to this, and that is that there are traders like Kaleo, right? Who I've observed have a serious impact on price. No denying it. Great trader, but do not deny that if he tweets something that does not have a massive effect on the price of it during certain times, right? So when there's enough capital to throw around. Now, another one that is along those lines I could think of all the very large accounts, Pentoshi, Shardy. These are people that I've observed when they post during peak bull cycle, immediate response in price. Like, you'd be dumb to not long when they did, right? because it's just free money. So what I've noticed is that Doge, Link, not Dot moved recently. There's another one. Maybe it was Uniswap or Sushi. Specifically Doge and Link. Everybody that could gain attention, right? So think none of them personally, right? And I have nothing against them whatsoever. But for people that are able to get the most eyes on the chart, right? That had a material impact on price in the past. If you look at their more recent posts and the movement of Doge, which, that's something that was sort of media response, Kaleo especially. These assets look like they're trading heavily, right? Which makes sense because this has been a very long cycle of new money coming in, and you do have to expect that a lot of people didn't sell their Doge, right? So that means a lot of people can't buy Doge right now, right? It doesn't necessarily have to mean that they can't buy it, but I think you get the idea. They're long, right? So these are things worth paying attention to. If large accounts tweet things about a pair that in the past you've seen, so this is empirically backed up, that they have moved instantly, and it's not something that is up for debate. Like, I don't want to fight with someone about how big accounts, whether or not they have an impact on price. They absolutely do, all right? If you look at a tick chart, there's almost no effect. So that's something that worries me a little bit, right? Maybe people are still tentative. A lot of people are still looking to BTC for clear direction. But these are all things that you should definitely be observing. I think that's going to cover it, though, for this video. I think I covered everything I wanted to go over. I mainly just wanted to go over ETH and BTC. Some of the smaller plays. So I'm looking at AVAX, but I'm wondering if, again, we are sort of late into the move for a lot of the pairs. In a normal situation, I would look at this and add to it. So just to be upfront, I own AVAX because we do have this retest. But I don't know how much we're going to get out of it if we do see any kind of pullback in the majors, right? So if BTC breaks up, I think your alt majors and your more popular pairs are going to move up with it. But I don't want to spread myself out too much and get too liberal with the long button, just because, again, I'd be going against all the things that I'm sort of pointing out right now. FTT, long FTT, troubling because we're falling back within a prior range, right? So this all-time high breakout, should have been very significant. And instead, we've seen a lot of selling come in. So people taking advantage of these higher prices to sort of offload. I am still going to be long this, right? I don't see a reason to just change it because it's a little muddy around the previous all-time high. But again, I'd be foolish to not recognize how that sort of is framed when I make all the other statements about the rest of the market as well. I think that covers it, though. I will talk to you guys soon. I think I'm trying to figure out my schedule about when I can hop on again. I really want to do more of these videos. It's just feel like there's always a million things to do. Anyway, all right. So enjoy your Labor Day weekend. I'll figure it out. I'll keep you guys updated, post links and stuff. And yeah, until next time.